Super Mario Odyssey is the Nintendo Switch's 3D Mario. Super Mario Galaxy is the Wii's 3D Mario. Super Mario Sunshine is the GameCube's 3D Mario. But do you know the tell of a truly great game? It's when the developers are confident enough to smack the console's name right there on the title. And Super Mario 64 did it twice. But you've heard it all before. It's got good level design. It's got good gameplay. It's got good flavor. There's not much else I can add that hasn't already been said. But that's not my purpose on this planet. I was made to remind you that there's more to Mario 64 than you remember. Even for you seasoned boomers who were there the Christmas of '96 with a shiny new cartridge in the N64, listening to Mario saying "It's a me" for the very first time. Mario 64 is one of the most renowned games of all time. Everyone knows that. But realistically, have any of you actually played it? I know that sounds absurd to ask. If you're watching this, of course you've played it. But most kids, and even teens nowadays, have barely touched it, and I bet less than half of you have actually beaten it. I mean, why should they? It's old, ugly, and you can't even play it on the Switch without a $50 subscription or limited edition game. Maybe it's overrated. Is everyone just old and nostalgic? No, of course not. But we can't blame them either. To most of us, it's pretty obvious. Of course Super Mario 64 is one of the best games of all time. The movement is perfect, the level design is insane, and the music? It rivals the likes of Bach, Holst, and Tchaikovsky. Well, think about what I said earlier. Playing this game nowadays is a pain if you follow Nintendo's rules, and it's not like emulation is that much easier. Besides, if you're used to Ray Trace Skibidi Toilet in Fortnite and Cell Shaded Breath of the Wild, inevitably, Mario 64 is gonna be the eyesore. At last, we have the final problem. Camera controls. Honestly, it's not as bad as I remember, but with the modern amenities of standardized camera controls, it can be rough. Which is what the whole argument boils down to. Super Mario 64 is rough to get into as a casual gamer nowadays. I've got friends who adore Mario Odyssey that wouldn't touch Mario 64 with a 39.5-foot pole, and I can't blame them either. Until today. Despite how annoying it is to play Mario 64 the correct way as Nintendo would decree, this is actually one of their most widely distributed games outside of the original Mario. Mario 64 has been playable in at least one way for every single one of Nintendo's consoles since the Wii, considering Virtual Console, Mario 3D All-Stars, and, most notoriously, 64DS. See, we're gonna have to go back to 2004 for this one. Love it or hate it, Super Mario 64 DS is a game, and it certainly does exist as a product. What does that mean? It's up to you. This game has many wonderful things going for it, and it makes it arguably one of the best ways to experience Mario 64. But then you remember that it controls terribly, and is even more painful to play legally. Every positive for this game is met with a bigger negative, and I wish I could do a deeper dive into what makes it so great and or terrible, but the controls alone are so rough that I failed to get past the first floor before giving up. However, I am a massive fan of these minigames, and I would happily spend all day talking about those. Another day, because the search for a better Mario 64 doesn't end at DS. It had potential, and I'm sure with a handful of mods, it still does. But if we're gonna break the law, we're gonna go all the way. There is one definitive way to experience Super Mario 64, and seeing as Nintendo is more focused on Switch 2 leakers right now, I'm not scared to tell you all about Super Mario 64 Plus is a PC port of the original N64 game. No, not an emulation or a ground-up recreation. This is a recompiled source version of Super Mario 64, currently for Windows and Linux. And boy, does this game make you feel some things you never thought possible. There's a chance I might be explaining this wrong, but if you don't understand why this version of Mario 64 is so great, it's essentially as if we had the original project files of the game where we could change anything about it. As you could guess, Nintendo isn't very happy about this, but the creative capabilities it allows are incredible. This fixes all but one of the problems with the original game. Do you want the game to look unreasonably good? We got a Waluigi mod right here, and several other graphical adjustments big and small. One of the small annoyances I always had with Mario 64 was the fact that it boots you out of the level every time you collect a star. Well, that's no longer a problem, because with a simple toggle, you're free to collect as many stars as you can find before leaving the level. At last, you kids no longer have to struggle with the aged camera controls of N64. Now you get to struggle with the brand new, modern camera controls. Mario 64 has a mode that allows full third-person camera control. The only problem with this surface is with the fact that Mario 64 wasn't made to be like this. You can look around at corners completely untouched, because you were never allowed to see it in the first place. In addition to that, there's many tight corridors where the camera bugs out and either glitches through walls or completely freaks out. I wouldn't be surprised if many people would be turned off by this and opt for the original camera controls, but having this option is incredible. That is nice and all, but wouldn't you want the option to turn the game into Mario Odyssey? Okay, well, not really, since it doesn't include Cappy, although I'm sure a mod like that exists or will exist soon enough. No, Super Mario 64 Plus didn't just end at optimizing the gameplay and visuals, they added a few treats as well. Inside the launcher settings, you can adjust a whole bunch of things, whether you want the game to be easier, harder, or, my favorite, straight up just adding mechanics from later games. This includes things such as the ground pound jump or dive rolling. If you're a Mario 64 purist, you might want to keep these things off as it makes many stars far easier to get, but I'm keeping it on because it makes this game an absolute pleasure from beginning to end. So how about that one problem this game doesn't fix? Well, seeing as the developers of Super Mario 64 Plus really don't want to be sued to death by Nintendo, they made it decently hard to install. For someone computer literate, it's not the hardest thing out there, but if you don't know your way around a command terminal, it feels like defusing a bomb. So now I'm asking the question, if a handful of modders could make the ultimate version of Mario 64 with only a couple of tweaks, why doesn't Nintendo do it themselves? Money! It's difficult to gauge just how well Super Mario 64 would sell if it was remade on its own. 3D All-Stars sold 9 million copies, but it was also 3 games in 1. But realistically, any 3D Mario is gonna be successful. I just don't know how successful it could be. Nintendo might just do the simple thing and port the original game by itself with some modernizations and leave it there. That game would probably sell okay, given they don't charge more than $40 max. But that's boring. This is one of their most beloved games, and they won't even give it a coat of fresh paint? In an ideal world, Super Mario 64 on the Switch 2 would not only be remade from the ground up, but also feature several of the following things. Streamlined gameplay. It's not the worst thing to have to back out of a level each time you collect a star, but imagine how much better it would be if you could just complete a whole level without going back to the castle. Next, there should be an updated art style, because inevitably, there will be millions in the future who will be turned off by a game like this just from the looks alone. But any remake should still allow the option to return to the original models if we'd like. And while we're on that, we can't forget about Mario 64 DS. This game is always the runt when talking about 3D Mario. But it shouldn't be. It's a technological and mechanical marvel, and it's a shame that it's stuck on the DS with miserable controls. This game needs a second life with all of its levels, characters, and especially minigames included. So if we end up getting a Mario 64 remake in the future, and it doesn't include anything from DS, I will be gravely disappointed. We need a Mario 64 DS mode to complement the original game. But it shouldn't be a replacement. But none of this exists yet on the Switch 2. We hardly even know what the next handheld from Nintendo is. What we do know is that nearly all of this already exists. Even Mario 64 DS Remaster is being developed in the Super Mario 64 Plus engine. All you have to do to enjoy every single one of these is to boot up your grandma's oxygen machine, load up SteamOS, and put in a handful of commands. If you're either turned off by the inaccessibility of the original game, or just haven't booted it up in a while, I urge you to give Super Mario 64 Plus a try. It might just give you a newfound appreciation for the original. The same way I appreciate you for sticking around this long. If you've got nothing else to do this Christmas season, treat yourself to some good old Super Mario 64 Plus. Just don't let your amiibos see. I'm told they report everything you do back to Nintendo. Anyways, with that, grab yourself some hot chocolate to stay warm, and as always, keep cool. Bye.